you very much for inviting us. It's a great pleasure to be here. I think it's good that we start interacting also at the global level with P&Is. I think they have a very important role in doing things in the maritime industry, so we're very happy to be here today. So working time, we're going to talk a little bit about working time, what is a practice and what is a culture in shipping, because we have to talk about culture at one point in shipping. So what we have today as working time is basically spread into regulations, IMO and ILO regulations. IMO STCW in section A, 8.1, this is fitness for duty it's called, and MLC 2006, regulation 2.3, and hours of work and hours of rest. So the idea of the regulation, especially I would go for the MLC one, is to provide a normality in the regulation. So the regulation start claiming that the normal working time for seafarers as any worker is 8 hours per day, 48 hours a week, and 1 day off. This is what the regulation says. This is a normality. It's clearly recalled in regulation 2.3. The normality applies to seafarers. However, in the same regulation, the MLC 2006 said that there is a possibility to extend, and there is two standards which are provided. The first standard is to extend according to hours of work. So seafarers' normal work is 48 hours, but they can extend up to 72 hours a week. Or the other standard is on hours of rest, and here it's in line with what the IMO is providing, 77 hours of work per week, which when we make the translation into hours of work, it means that seafarers can work up to 91 hours per week. It is the regulation. So the regulation says seafarers can work up to 91 hours per week today, anytime on any ship today, basically. So it's not surprising that you were saying that you were working 86 hours per week, and when you were over 91 hours, basically you were in violation of the regulation. Okay, so we started to work on what's happening in shipping, and we started to work on understanding what are the different stakeholders have to say about the situation in shipping in practice. So we talk about the seafarers, ship owners organization, industry, different industry, including insurances, NGOs, special government agencies such as casualty investigation, and we talked a lot with PSC officer to see how a post control officer implement the regulation practice. What are they looking at or not looking at? So it was the first start is very much to understand in depth what's happening. And after we made a quantification exercise, how many hours people work, etc., and many other aspects in order to understand the implementation of regulations. So here it's the biggest ever done on the topic in shipping. So we have a very high level of response by seafarers. So what we've been collecting here is our averages. In average, a seafarer works about 11.5 hours per day. And they are working per week about 74.9, so basically 75 hours per week. This is an average. There is differences according to types of ships, some a little bit less, some a little bit more, some substantially more, it varies, but the average is about 75 hours. What we know also, and if you remember, the average required for normal workers 48 hours, so here for seafarers we are at 75, and it's required also by the ILO that normal work means also 1 day off per week. So we looked at how often seafarers have day off, and we've been also surprised to see this data that nearly 80% of seafarers do not have a single day off during their entire period on board, which can last for some of them 10 months or even more. So here we have people working about 11 hours per day, 75 hours per week, and have no day off for up to 10 months or sometimes more. So here we come back to something which is more legal here, and I'm sure there's some lawyers here. And it's what the ILO considered as decent working time. The ILO developed something, a matrix to measure what is decent work. And in this matrix, in this reports done by the ILO, basically there is a notion of decent working time. And what the ILO says, decent working time is basically everything below 48 hours. This is decent working time. When we are above 48 hours, it's not decent, and the ILO have a specific vocabulary. If you work more than 48 hours, but below 60 hours, you are in long work hours system. If you are working above 60 hours per week, you are very long hours. But when we see where we are, for seafarers, 53+% work more than 72 hours. So it's far beyond even what is in the ILO. So it doesn't even exist in the ILO, this idea of what the seafarers work. It doesn't even exist in their matrix of decent work. So it's interesting. So what we've noticed also, there is this big and very large possibility of working long hours. In addition to that, we've noticed, and it has been highlighted in the literature, scientific literature for more than 2 decades, that there is violations. And when we discuss about violation of this rest hours regulation, we observe that there is 88% of seafarers which are in compliance at least once a month, So it's not only that we have very high level of possible hours of work, but in addition to that, people are violating in order to complete their work. So we know what they're doing, because if they're in violation, they have to do something. But what they are doing for most seafarers, they are just adjusting the records, making up records. So we're entering in a situation where the records that are going to be verified by posted control officers are adjusted. And this is why we have been working a lot with posted control officers to see their practice, but it's a different topic.
So yeah, in this study that is being presented to you right now, we also wanted to analyze the role of flag states as an influencing factor in shipping working time practices. And then we established some comparison groups and between flag states belonging to the European Economic Area and other flag states not belonging to the European Economic Area. And what we see concerning the working time indicators explained to you before, weekly work hours, weekly full day off, monthly no compliance and adjustment of work and rest records, what we saw is that there were no differences between these two groups concerning the number of hours that seafarers work per week, or if they have work day off or not. And concerning, about the number of hours they work per week, monthly compliance or not, and adjustment of work and rest records. We found a difference, a statistically significant difference between the two groups of comparison concerning weekly full day off. But if you look at the graphs when we analyze the effect size of this difference, the difference is almost insignificant. So there was not a practical significance. So we didn't, in the end, find differences between the two groups of comparison. We also established a second comparison between flag of convenience as listed by the International Transport Federation and other kind of flag states not included in that group. For this comparison, again, we didn't find differences, statistically significant differences concerning weekly work hours or concerning monthly non-compliance. We found a small difference between these two groups concerning weekly full day off. And as you see on the graph, in flag states considered a flag convenience or second registries, there is a higher percentage of those who don't have a day off. However, again, the effect size of this difference was below 0.1. That means that it doesn't have a practical significance. And the same for adjustment of work rest, adjustment of work and rest hours records. There was a small difference between the two groups, significant, but again, in terms of effect size, this difference didn't was significant. So we also wanted to analyze, but as a part of a separate study, the role of flag states in working time regulatory framework. And we have done a separate study reviewing the Declaration of Maritime Labour Compliance Part 1, which is, as you know, a document that is issued by flag states in order to list all the national legislations concerning MLC and how MLC is in place. And for this study, we review in total 55 flag states, 35 flag states, the big flag states in terms of deadweight tonnage, share world deadweight tonnage. And we also included in the analysis flag states of the European Economic Area. So in total, these flag states represent more than the 90% of world share deadweight tonnage. And what we see here is that first, none of these flag states or no country imposes a strict 48-hour work week limit, what means in practice that the intention of the ILO, as explained by Raphael before, of having as a normality 48-hour of a work week is invalidated somehow. We found that there was a handful of countries represented 2.9% of the world deadweight tonnage who opt for a 72 hours of work week. So that means choosing, let's say, the most favorable standard for their workers, their fleets, permitting a 72 hours per week. However, most of the flag states review, representing the 89.4% of world deadweight tonnage, adopt minimum 77 hours of rest. So opting for the less favorable standard for the fleets because it permits, as explained earlier, a maximum of 91 hours per week. There were a few flag states that adopt what we can consider mixed standards, so opting for both at the same time, but contradicting the intent of the Maritime Labour Convention. And in these cases, favoring normally the ship's operational profiles. So we see in summary that then in terms of practices, in terms of laws, there are no differences between the flag states for seafarers. So, but it's important to bring here a glimpse of the evidence we know that we have so far about the impact of long working hours and as connected with this sleep deprivation on safety and health of workers. And see, in comparison with the data we obtain, what we can say. What does the health literature says about working time? They say that they establish a limit, which is 50 hours, and beyond which working beyond this limit, the work becomes unhealthy. There is a recent study, which is a meta-analysis conducted by ILO and WHO. A meta-analysis, as you know, is a systematic analysis and quantification of previous research that can derive some kind of conclusions about the aspect of research. And in this meta-analysis, they conclude that exposing to long working hours, which is established in this case beyond 55 hours per week, causes large attributable burdens of ischemic heart disease and stroke, in connection with what our colleague explained before, or provided an example, probably. And going beyond that, working for long work hours is considered the greatest risk factor for death, either bigger than occupational particulate matter gases and fumes and occupational injuries, with distance with these two factors that you see on the graph. But seafarers are exposed to these two occupational aspects too. So what we can say is that in the words of ILO is that excessive and atypical hours of work are a real threat to physical and mental health, interfering with also the balance between work and family life, which is another important aspect contributing to individuals' well-being. So what we know in maritime, there are different studies. We have selected this because it's a well-established and designed study conducted on 22 container ships, and the medical doctors that conducted this study used questionnaires and also objective biometrical data, so they analyze physiological parameters like heart rate and so on, and they concluded that by average the sleep duration of seafarers is 5 hours per day. And most of them have, especially deck officers, short sleep episodes. So interrupted, and not continuous episodes of sleep. However, if you compare with the health literature, a good health sleep number of hours should be for adults between 7 and 9 hours. So there are other studies, and we have 2 good examples in projects Horizon and Marta that studied fatigue, and this is actigraphy coming from a shipmaster in which we can see these interactive patterns of sleep, associated with their non-routinary, practices of work that seafarers do on board. So this affects health very much. And this is a collection of evidence about science of sleep by this neuroscientist Matthew Walker. I strongly recommend that if you don't know this book, you read it, because it's an eye-opener to understand, the impact of sleep on our physical and mental health. And it says, as a conclusion, that any individual, no matter what age, will exhibit physical alignments, mental health instability, reduced alertness, and impaired memory if their sleep is chronically disrupted. And in this book, you can see plenty of experience of this. And now, Raphael will come back to the stage and will present another study we have conducted recently about fatigue.
Okay, so now we just give the picture, but there is a tendency to a little bit say, okay, but what can we do in terms of monitoring and to have objective evidence? And this is what we did recently with medical doctors. It was a team between maritime experts and medical doctors. And I'm going to show you some of the things that we've been doing. We cannot disclose the full information. I'm sorry for that. It's a specific request from a government, so we cannot disclose everything, but I will just show you a few things of what we did. So here you can see it's one of the elements. We used validated questionnaires on fatigue and well-being, which we can find in the world, and we initiate an actigraphy, and this is a lady here, was a medical doctor I was working with on the ship. So it's real on-board recording, medical device with everything. So here you can see a reaction time assessment on the left, and you see pupillometry with me with the big mask. And here it's a way to look at your level of sleeplessness and your risk of sleeping. It's a very accurate and very well done thing. There's cameras inside watching your pupil and what's happening there. So these are some of the tests we were doing, and there is some other tests that we were doing on board. Is what is the best now in terms of sleep is what's called a polysomnography. So this is what we have been deploying. There are many other possibilities, but these are the ones that we developed, we use for this particular research. So what we observed from this research, I will just give you a few things. First of all, on the fatigue index, the ESS, one of the fatigue indexes, what we have been observed on seafarers higher than general population. It's far higher than general population. It's one of the first elements. However, in this group of ships, which is type of ships is different than container ship, it was basically the same as container ship, because the doctors I work with were the doctors that worked a lot on container ships. And we have the same thing, even if the class of ship was different. What we've seen also on the second point is WHO indicators that well-being of seafarers for 28% of them is below 13 points, meaning that they are at risk of developing mental health issues. And after we have the last one, the number 3 is some of the outcome of the pupillometry. And what you can see in the graph on your, I think, right, yes, you can see this orange curve coming in. So over the week, you can see this orange number increasing. This orange number means that you are unfit for duty, that your risk of falling asleep during your duty is extremely high. And the blue one means that you are close to the limit. So you can see the numbers are just increasing drastically, and we can estimate over a period of 2 weeks here that about 10% of the seafarers that we observed were in risk of unfitness for duty. So it's a pretty significant number. So in conclusion, what we observe, in terms of regulations, we observe a normalization of deviance, because there is a normalization of what is unfavorable and unhealthy working time standards in shipping, as exemplified in the MSEA 2006 and the STCW. We also noticed that there is inappropriate monitoring by authority, and this is a poor state, and malpractices in recording, and both of them are linked together. Malpractices, inappropriate monitoring, so basically a limited enforcement capacity. And inaction to solve the issue. Why inactions? Because in our work, and especially in the second one, we went to the literature over the last 20 years. And in the last 20 years, what we report has been reported for the last 20 years by many other researchers from the States, from UK, from anywhere. They report the same thing again and again for 20 years on fatigue. Forgotten science, also something which is noticeable. The acceptance in shipping of standards which are beyond physiological limits of human beings means that there is an ignorance of science, forgotten science when we develop regulation. So there is a lack of human factors understanding and application. There is a divergence between what regulation is doing and science says about fatigue, sleep, working time. And if we want a better regulatory framework, we need to include science a lot more than what we are doing today. Decent work, and here this is, I would say, more for the lawyer's perspective. It's how it is defined by the ILO, the measurement of decent work and measurement of decent working time. Basically, we're far away. It looks like there is a paradigm of labor cost reduction in the maritime that makes that any human factors and occupational safety and health perspective are just put it aside or just downgraded in order to have this paradigm staying. So in fact, there is action needed. And when we were talking with seafarers, it's this idea of nothing change ever. So they want to see action. And if we have to develop standards in addition to science, we have also to consider what has been developed by the ILO as decent working time for the other workers, and probably considering seafarers as other workers. That's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.